I've got a good way we could segue this, because here's the thing, Young Buck. If we want to take this back into LEC now, I think the interesting conversation to have would be this. If you wanted to talk about the idea of what we were talking about there, just get the best players you can and then hope they adapt. G2 is in that situation right now. Effectively, what they did in the offseason is try to just get the best possible player for that role and then worry about the rest after it. Figure out, listen, we've got the best players, we'll figure it out, whatever. With the current meta, what's going on right now in League, they're obviously having some big problems. We've seen how many games they've lost, the different levels of opponents, even in all the interviews, they're not really exuding any confidence. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but they used to trash talk. You could kind of tell it was tongue-in-cheek in the past years. Now they actually look like they're just admitting, yeah, we're not very good. What do you think of like the G2 problems? Because on paper, I still find it positive. I look at the names and I'm like, surely there's some way to make this work. Surely there's some way to like adapt to this better. But they do feel like their read and the way some of the players are playing is nothing like what you'd expect. So what are your thoughts on G2 at the moment, Young Buck?
Feels a bit like an enigma because the meta shifted back towards a style that should fit G2 extremely well and what brought them success in the past. They can play around mid lane with the jungle and support and be successful, and they should be the best team. If you ask me right now, which team would you really not want to face in the best of 5, I'd still say G2 because the names on the list are just too good. And the question is if there are internal issues or maybe that motivation is catching up, because I can imagine if you've gone to Worlds, you've gone to the finals, you failed, you went to Worlds again, you fail again, and now you come back to the LEC to just do another rodeo, but you don't believe that you're gonna make it far at Worlds. It could be that there are massive motivation issues behind it. That seems to be, to me at least, the most likely scenario.
I'll even say, by the way, even though I know people definitely did make too much like direct comparison between the Perkz went to Cloud9 and they won, but G2 stood and then they didn't win with Reckless equals like that's a pretty big reach right there, because they're playing totally different opponents, totally different leagues. But one thing I will say I do think was misunderstood by G2 is I do think too much of how they weighed up the offseason was like, well, as a mid laner, Caps is the better player though. It's like, yeah, but that's why we can use that phrase with Turks, like intangibles. Like the difference is this: if I have a team like you're talking about that's won the domestic championship loads of times in a row, even times when they weren't maybe supposed to, they've been to Worlds every time and they're always top 4, they're in the final. It's pretty hard then when you change lineup to expect every player to stay totally on the cutting edge, killing themselves. Like that's where a player like Perkz, everyone. I know everyone tried to report it like, oh, it's a bit toxic. I 4P fucking is, because I tell you what, in that scenario where we've already won the championship loads of times, sometimes you have to kick the other guy up his ass to get him practicing again, or tell him, you know what, you might think it's funny that you're fucking around in week 3, but like you'll be week 9 before you know, so you better start getting. Guys like that are like mad invaluable in my opinion for the coach. Like that's where as a coach, like, a lot of coaches still can't do that job. They can upset the player. It's very tenuous relationship. Like I think people have really misunderstood like what Perkz brought in terms of like the culture of the team, you know.
Absolutely, and I'm actually a big fan of making a change, or at least 2 changes every season. There was a big learning lesson as well in the Fnatic 2018 to 2019. We made it to the finals, of course, and then had the same roster roll over minus Soaz that people was now a sole starter, and we only had one change in Nemesis. Everything else stayed the same. And you could see that the motivation was extremely low, and you need 1 or 2 rookies. I think 2 is an ideal number to bring that fire. And if you don't have that, like G2 doesn't have that, so they probably don't have a guy that is spamming their asses off or calling people out for their shit anymore, because they've been there, they've done that, they have a set level of respect, and yeah, I think they're just okay with it.
I mean, I think it's true what you're saying. It's right now for a lot of these G2 players, what else is like the only thing they haven't done is win Worlds, right? And so when you see Perkz leave, and you realize that this roster that had done all, had won all these titles, had all this international success, and there isn't really a good, sure you get Reckless, but is that going to be enough to propel you to a potential Worlds title? I think if the G2 players are honest with themselves, the answer is probably no. And so I think it's extremely difficult to maintain motivation when you keep that kind of same core of veteran players and add another super veteran player to it without having any kind of refresh or new blood or rookies that you at least in your mind think, okay, maybe this can take us to the next level. Maybe the shot of adrenaline, this energy is what we need. Because right now it just seems like, if I was them, maybe you think, well, we've already peaked and this roster is not going to get us there. So what is the principle behind giving our hardest in this situation?
Absolutely. And I guess G2 is also on a bit unlucky, because I would say that if you looked at the rosters at the start of the season, you say they have the best player in each position. So how can they even improve their roster? It just feels like you're in that situation. All you want to do is win worlds. You're just doomed because there's no one available that can actually strengthen your roster.
Yeah, this was actually a point I made on the Crackdown, which a lot of fans might not understand. It sounds counterintuitive, right? Every fan who doesn't know coaching thinks, right, well, the easiest way to coach is just have all the best players. By the way, that's incredibly difficult to coach all the best players. Like, It's actually way easier, for example, to have like an obvious hierarchy. Like, if I have Uzi and then I have some fucking shitter in top lane, I'm never going to have to worry about a debate between, should we play through top lane or AD? There's an obvious reason. But another one would be like this. Another reason why it's really hard to coach the best players is every other team is doing the approach as Youngblock just did, where when things go badly, you bring in the rookie and who can you bring in instead of G2? So you're going to bring in someone else instead of Caps? No way. You're going to bring in someone else instead of Wonder? Very unlikely. So actually, the mad thing is, if you're Grabs, you are told you are not allowed to change any players because they're all the best. But even when they're not the best, because they aren't today who the player is on paper, you have to somehow get them to be that player, even though, again, you have no option to bench them. Like, all right, who's this a guy, a fucking miracle worker? He's just a coach. Like, I actually think he's got an incredibly difficult job right now, because he will be held accountable as if this was all the players at their peak on paper. But actually, at the moment in the server, if I turned the nameplates off, people would they would guess wrong on a lot of the names in G2 right now, especially some of the solo lane play I've seen. Like, no one would believe these were those players.
It's funny, but it's also distressing. I mean, you see those like screen caps of like Caps being 11th place in certain statistical categories. Now, keep in mind, there are 10 teams in the LEC, and he's in 11th place in certain mid lane statistical categories.
That is pure banter, I can't lie.
It's so funny. It is really funny.
I
know. But, I agree. I think as a coach's job, it's really difficult to control this roster with the egos that are involved and the past success, because I especially feel for Nelson coming in, because I think he has great ideas and a really good understanding of the game, but trying to come in from the outside and motivate players. This is what I always say about veteran lineups who have seen success in the past. If there is a dip in performance, what veteran players will do, and I think Youngbuck can speak to this, is that they will go back in their minds and think, well, we were successful doing this thing in the past, which may have been, it's kind of an appeal to antiquity logical fallacy, where you're not taking into account, well, other players have improved, or perhaps the structure around other teams, like the infrastructure of the esport has improved to a degree where those tactics no longer work. But players want to rewind time in their minds to when they were winning and say, well, we were successful for this reason in the past. We're not going to listen to this new guy telling us to change the structure because that's not how we won. Now, sometimes that can be true, but a lot of times it's just bullshit in their own heads, and breaking them out of that or getting them into new habits is really hard, especially as a new coach coming in.
Yeah, there's no way. He's never going to get a fair treatment in that regard. And I think if you look at G2, if them not winning Spring Split isn't going to change their mindset, then put a fire back under their asses, then nothing can. And just bringing in Nelson isn't going to do it. It's going to be a situation where in the offseason they probably have to look at making 1 or 2 roster changes or massive staff changes, or a mixture of those two to get the motivation back. It seems like a very difficult position for them to be in right now.
Another thing I'm sure you could speak to, being as obviously you were in teams like G2 that won the 4 championships in a row, and then you're in the Fnatic team that won the 2 championships. Another thing that people who are fans will always take for granted is they assume that every single player really does, I'm just practicing as much as I possibly can because I just want to win, man. It's like, that's actually just what they say in interviews. Like, it's very rare that you get the people who are like the sports champions, who are just like obsessed with winning, and they really do absolutely everything in their power. Most people, I always say, want to win in the sense that winning's the best outcome, but they want to win while being semi-comfortable. They want to win, on their terms, playing the way they like and the practicing the way they like. So another thing that people really take for granted is they think, well, if I won the championship, by the way, spoiler, you won't win the championship. That's why you're fucking a pleb watching a screen right now that you literally are going to jack off watching the same screen with, technically it's a mirror. Think about it, right? But this is my problem, right? When you're in this scenario where you're a fan, you imagine if you won that you'd be so motivated to win again. It's actually not the case. Yep. People who are obsessive winners are like that, because what they actually will even admit is winning is the only thing that matters to me in life. I don't even care how well I play, by the way. If I play amazing in the final and I lose and I'm an obsessive winner, that was the worst day of my life. They don't do that thing that a fan can do. Like, well, you dropped 50, but you lost. dude, those guys would be destroyed. But the problem with that is a normal person will have a year where it goes awesome, they win a championship, and then the next year they're like, whatever, we were in the mix, I did my best, but it wasn't the right split.
I got the fat new paycheck, from winning.
There's loads of other reasons.
Yeah,
there's lots of other things to enjoy in life. So in my opinion, when you have those rare people who have that drive, like you can't let them get out your hands. Like Perkz is one of them. I'll give you a funny one because it's in a different way. Mithy is like that, but this is even better, Monty. He's like it in a different sense. You have to go and watch my reflections of him to appreciate. He was literally changing all of his teams because yes, he wanted to win again, but now Monty, he wanted to win without one of the former teammates, so he could prove to them that it was him that won. That's like some other level up here. Because like Michael Jordan's like, I just want to win all the championships. That's like if Michael Jordan was like, I want to win, but now this time you can't be on my team, Scottie Pippen.
With
like,
style.
What? You know what I mean? Like that's what Mithy was doing. He was on some shit. I'm like, look, I don't want to win, and then everyone say it was because I was with Perkz. I've got to win against Perkz. Like, all right.
Now he's got to be a coach so he can win that way too, to show that it was his mastermind, the entire time. No, I love that kind of mentality and drive.
Shit.
And there's also the factor that some players have extraordinary natural ability, but maybe not the best work ethic or most dedication. And I've been an advocate of saying, like, look, you have to treat certain players differently. Certain players may require time off. Certain players may require less practice or more practice in order to be at their peak. Wonder is a case where it's like, this guy has exceptional natural talent, but I think there are questions as to whether he legitimately plays the game enough to kind of, peak, let's say. I'm not sure if we've ever actually seen the peak of Wonder in terms of a purely theoretical universe. A player that I can speak to more specifically would be like Stefano, who's a very famous StarCraft player. Now, Stefano, for those of you who don't know, he's a French player. He was extraordinarily intelligent, extraordinarily naturally gifted at playing StarCraft. He would not practice and be able to compete with some of the best Korean players in the world. And he was notorious for, I'm not saying this is a one-to-one comparison with Wonder, but he was notorious for partying. He was notorious for kind of his antics. He was kind of like the Dennis Rodman of StarCraft in a way. And maybe he needed that in order to be at his peak. I don't know. But you are kind of left wondering, what if Stefano had a Korean work ethic? Would he have been the best player in StarCraft 2? He had the natural talent to be the best player ever. Like I don't think it's unfair to say that. And so I kind of am curious at this stage about Wonder if he put more effort into the game, if he would have better results at this point in time, or what his peak could have been. In the same way that I am curious about, in a theoretical universe, if Stefano had a different personality, what his level of greatness could have been.
Yeah, I think it's so extremely different from player to player, and with Wonder, the question is maybe if he even plays enough, if he's actually legitimately just playing World of Warcraft. He has hidden accounts, so I couldn't answer. Yeah,
it's also gonna be a meme, right?
Yeah. Like, we don't know his secret accounts, so we don't even know how many games he's playing. But it does differ a lot from player to player. For example, Beppo as a rookie was playing 25 to 30 games a week on average, which is an extremely low amount for a snooker player. But it worked for him. It's the zone in which he just plays the best. And Nemesis as a rookie was playing between 90 and 120 games, which is out of his mind. Like, this guy wasn't sleeping 8 hours a day. He was sleeping 5 hours a day because he was just playing so much solo queue, and that was working for him. So I think Wunder is probably closer to Beppo's number, but the question is he actually hitting 10 games a week? Because based off of what we're hearing, he's not.
And by the way, if you're a fan, please do not ever take the fact that you occasionally have Friday off and play 10 games in a row of solo queue, as in that's what it's like when these guys practice. Like, you're playing, they're practicing. Like, I can tell you, I'll give you a StarCraft 2 analogy. There was a Norwegian player, he actually played for Team Liquid eventually, called Snoot, right? And before he was in Team Liquid, he was just a guy in the Norwegian scene, and he became up in the European scene in 2012, and he did literally like a career progression, like a ladder. Like, he started out he could come top 16 at like a all right LAN, then he could come top 8, and then eventually he had like an upset over a Korean, and then he was top 4, and then eventually, you know, he won a tournament at the end of the year or whatever. And basically this guy, the whole time, he'd heard all these stories about Korean StarCraft players, like they play like, you know, fucking 20 games a day on ranked, and then, you know, they have this many extra like custom practices. So he did it, Monty. He literally just locked himself away, and he would play this number of games per day. And he literally, I've done interviews with him, he told me shit like at certain points in time, he actually thought he was losing his mind. His dreams were all him inside StarCraft playing the game. Like, it just took over his whole life. So a fan who just thinks that it's just a couple more games, like the dedication we're talking about, like the really top level guys, like they are sacrificing way more than you realize. Like, I actually personally think we're only like a generation away from them doing some documentaries about like Korean StarCraft players and League of Legends players, where they're going to literally say that like these guys like ruined their brains, basically. Like, think about how much fucking they sacrificed to be the best at these games. It's brutal.
I mean, I just anecdotally, obviously, I've never been a pro player. I was like a kind of semi-pro, like Warcraft 3 player when I was in my late stages of high school. And this was a time when I would literally come back from school at lunch, like to watch Spirit Moon replays. And it got to the point where like one summer I was playing so many games and practicing so hard that I literally started dreaming about Warcraft 3 matches like every night. And at that point I was like, that was actually the point where I was like, I do not want to be a pro player. I would much rather be a caster, because I was like, this is insane and unhealthy and is potentially ruining my life. So I kind of like slipped into that territory for a little bit, but I got myself out of there pretty quickly because I realized that that wasn't what I wanted personally. And I kind of moved into the broadcasting or entertainment and like team management ends, because I still loved esports, but that was a little much, I have to say. But I respect the people who can do it, but I do wonder how healthy it is.
Sure. I actually had the same thing happen to me, Monty. It's when I knew I'd been watching too much European LCS back in the day, because I used to have dreams where I was there and I was playing, and obviously I was like a control mage mid laner, you know, playing a bit of Orianna, doing a great job, always keeping up in my CS. And then what would happen in the dream every time, Monty, it was a recurring dream, is we'd get to a late game scenario and it was the one big team fight that was going to decide the game. And then every time I died, I would look and my AD carry was fucking reckless, and I was like, oh God, he's not going in. I was like, why can't I finish? What is wrong with you? And then I would wake up and then it'd just be him, and the last words I'd hear would him going, sorry honey, what about my KDA? And then I'd just wake up every time, and I remember thinking, I've probably got a problem with this game. Someone's gone too far here, Monty. I better come back to reality. It was like fucking Inception, like, come back to reality, Thorin, it's just a game. And I came back. So, or did the top ever stop spinning? Is Reckless still in G2 passing? I don't know. Could be reality, could be Inception still, I don't know. None of that was true, by the way. I made that all. So.
Yeah, we really needed that disclaimer.
People don't want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content. Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.